In this video, I want to tell you more of these people. They overcame the curse of the yellow fever and spread their roots deeper on this new planet. Not only was Australia heavily populated, but so was the area now known as Antarctica. Of course, in those days, its position meant that its climate was temperate. New Guinea was also densely settled. By the end of the yellow fever scourge, the blacks numbered 795 million. However, Antarctica is not a habitable continent at present, but at that time it was attached to Australia and very much warmer than now, since Earth rotated on a different axis. The Antarctic climate was more like southern Russia is now. Now that you know they have lived and developed on Earth for a long time, did they ever return to Baccaratini? Once established on Earth, they made strict rules that no one would return. And what became of their planet? It cooled down as predicted and became a desert, much like Mars. Some people are curious about their political structure, and it is very simple. Election, by raised hands, of the leader of a village or district. These district leaders elected a town leader, as well as 8 old people chosen from among those most respected for their wisdom, common sense, integrity, and intelligence. They were never selected on the basis of wealth or family, and all were between 45 and 65 years of age. The town or regional leaders, a region comprised 8 villages, had the role of negotiating with the 8 old people. The council of 8 elected, by a secret ballot requiring that at least 7 voted in accord, a delegate to represent them at meetings of state council. In Australia, for example, there were 8 states, each of which comprised 8 towns or regions. At state council meetings there were thus 8 delegates, each representing a different town or region. At a state council meeting, presided over by a great sage, they discuss the type of day-to-day problems that confront any government: water conveyance, hospitals, roads, etc. In regards to roads, both the black and the yellow races used very light vehicles, with a hydrogen motor, which traveled above the ground, thanks to a system based on anti-magnetic and anti-gravitational force. But, to get back to the political system, there was no such thing as a party, everything being based solely on reputation for integrity and wisdom. Long experience had taught them that to establish an order that would endure required 2 golden ingredients: fairness and discipline. I will speak to you some other time of their economic and social organization and give you an idea now of their system of justice. A thief, for example, genuinely considered to be guilty, was branded with a red-hot iron on the back of the hand he or she ordinarily used. So, a right-handed thief was branded on the right hand. A subsequent offense resulted in the left hand being cut off. This is a practice that still occurred quite recently among the Arabs, a practice conserved throughout time past. If he or she continued to steal, the right hand would be cut off, and the forehead marked with an indelible symbol. Without hands, the thief was at the mercy and pity of his family and passers-by for food, for everything. Because people would recognize the symbol as that of a thief, life became very difficult. Death would have been preferable. In this way, the thief became a living example of what happened to a habitual offender. Needless to say, theft was a rare occurrence. As for murder, this too was rare, as you will see. Accused murderers were taken to a special room and left alone. Behind a curtain, a mind reader would be installed. This was a man who not only possessed a special telepathic gift, but who also cultivated that gift in a constant endeavor, in one or another of the special universities. He would intercept the thoughts of the supposed murderer. You are going to retort that it is possible with training to make one's mind blank, but not for 6 hours at a stretch. Further, At various times when he or she might least expect it, certain predetermined sounds would be heard, obliging the subject to break concentration. As a precautionary measure, 6 different mind readers were used. The same procedure was applied to witnesses for the prosecution or defense in another building some distance away. Not a word would be exchanged, and on the 2 following days, the procedure would be repeated, this time for 8 hours. On the 4th day, all the mind readers submitted their notes to a panel of 3 judges, who interviewed and cross-examined the accused and the witnesses. There were no lawyers or juries to impress. The judges had before them all the particulars of the case and wanted to be absolutely sure of the guilt of the accused. You may ask why. Because the penalty was death, but a terrible death, the murderer being thrown alive to the crocodiles. As for rape, which was considered worse than murder, the punishment was even crueler. The offender was coated with honey and buried to the shoulders in the immediate vicinity of an ant colony. Death, at times, would take 10 or 12 hours. As you will now understand, the crime rate was extremely low among both races, and, for this reason, they had no need for prisons. You might think this method of execution is excessively cruel, but consider the mother of a 16-year-old girl, for example, who was raped and murdered. Doesn't she endure, in the loss of her child, cruelty of the worst kind? She did not provoke or seek her loss, but she must suffer. The criminal, on the other hand, is aware of the consequences of his actions. Thus, it is just that he be punished very cruelly. As I have explained, however, criminality was almost non-existent. Returning to religion. I said earlier that both races believed in reincarnation, but there were variations on their beliefs that, at times, divided them. Certain priests diverted masses of people to group them, under their leadership, in these variant religions. The divisions that resulted among the blacks had disastrous repercussions. Eventually, about 500,000 blacks emigrated in the wake of their priests to Africa, to the area where the Red Sea is now. At that time, the Red Sea did not exist, and the land was African. They began to construct villages and towns, but the political system, as I described to you, which was fair and effective in all respects, was abandoned. The priests themselves elected the heads of government, so that these leaders became, more or less, puppets manipulated by the priests. From that time on, the people had to face many of the problems that are so familiar to you on earth at the present time: corruption, prostitution, drugs, and all manner of injustices. As for the yellow people, they were very well structured, and, in spite of some slight religious distortions, their priests had no say in the affairs of state. They lived in peace and affluence, quite different from the secessionist black race in Africa. And in regard to arms, what sorts of weapons did they have? It was quite simple, and, as simplicity is often superior to complexity, it worked wonderfully well. Both races brought with them what we could call laser weapons. These weapons were under the control of a special group, which, in turn, was under the direction of the leaders of each country. By common accord, each race had exchanged 100 observers, whose presence was permanent in each foreign country. These observers were ambassadors and diplomats for their own countries at the same time, ensuring that an arms excess did not occur. This system worked perfectly, and peace was maintained for 3,550 years. The blacks who emigrated to Africa, however, had not been allowed to take these weapons with them, being, as they were, a secessionist group. Little by little they spread further, settling the area that is now the Sahara Desert. In those times, it was a rich land with a temperate climate, providing a well-vegetated habitat for many animals. The priests had temples constructed, and, To satisfy their desire for wealth and power, they taxed the people heavily. Among a people who had never before known poverty, there now formed two distinct classes, the very rich and the very poor. The priests, of course, belonged to the former, as did those who helped them to exploit the poor. Religion became idolatry, and the people worshipped stone or wooden gods, offering sacrifices to them. It was not long before the priests insisted that the sacrifices must be human. From the beginning of the secession, the priests took pains to ensure that the people were kept in ignorance to the greatest extent possible. By lowering their intellectual and physical level of development over the course of years, the priests were better able to maintain domination over them. The religion which had developed had absolutely nothing in common with the cult that had originally inspired the secession, so control of the masses was essential. Universal law decrees that man's principal obligation, regardless of which planet he happens to inhabit, is to develop his spirituality. These priests, by degrading an entire nation through keeping them in ignorance and leading them with lies, infringed this fundamental law. The Auba decided at this point to intervene, but, before doing so, offered the priests a last chance. Using telepathy, as well as a dream, they contacted the great priest. Human sacrifices must cease, and these people must be led back to the right path. Man exists physically for the sole purpose of developing spiritually. What you are doing contravenes universal law. The great priest was terribly shaken, and, the next day, called a meeting of his priests, telling them of his dream. A few among them accused him of betrayal, others suggested senility, and some suspected hallucinations. Eventually, following several hours of discussion, 12 of the 15 priests who formed this council remained determined to preserve the religion as it was, claiming that the ideal was to maintain control and to promote the belief in and fear of vengeful gods whose representatives they were on earth. They didn't believe a word of what the great priest had told them regarding his dream. Sometimes the Auba's position is very delicate. They could have appeared with their spacecraft and spoken directly to the priests, but they were able to identify vessels from space, having had them too before the secession. They would have attacked the Auba immediately, no questions asked, for they were very suspicious and fearful of losing their preeminence within their nation. They had formed an army and possessed quite powerful weapons to be used to counter possible revolutions. The Auba could also have destroyed them and spoken directly to the people in order to lead them back to the right path, but, psychologically, this would have been a mistake. These people were accustomed to obeying their priests and would not have understood why the Auba interfered in the affairs of their country. Thus, all would have been spoiled. So it was that one night the Auba's spacecraft flew above the country at an altitude of 10,000 meters in one of their tool spheres. The temple and the holy city were situated about 1 kilometer from the town. They woke, by telepathy, the great priest and the 2 acolytes who had followed his advice, making them go, on foot, to a beautiful park, 1.5 kilometers from the holy city. Then, by collective hallucination, they had the guards open the jails and release the prisoners. Servants, soldiers, in fact, all the inhabitants of the holy city, with the exception of the 12 evil priests, were evacuated. Inspired by strange visions in the sky, everyone ran for the other end of the town. In the sky, winged personages hovered around an enormous incandescent cloud which shone in the night. But how is that done? It is collective illusion. Thus, in a very short time, it was arranged that only the 12 evil priests remained in the holy city. When all was ready, the tool sphere destroyed it all, including the temple. Rocks were shattered, and walls crumbled to a height of 1 meter, that their ruins might bear witness to the consequence of this sin. Indeed, if they had been totally effaced, human would soon have forgotten, for human easily forget. Further, and for the edification of the people, a voice issuing from the incandescent cloud warned that the anger of God could be terrible, much worse than they had seen, and that they must obey the great priest and follow the new way which he would show them. When it was all over, the great priest stood before the people and spoke to them. He explained to the poor wretches that he had been wrong, and that it was now important that everyone strive together to follow the new way. He was assisted in his work by the two priests. Of course, times were often hard, but they were aided by the memory and the fear of the event that had destroyed, in a matter of minutes, the holy city and killed the evil priests. Needless to say, this event was considered by all to be a miracle of the gods, for it also involved the liberation of more than 200 prisoners who were to face human sacrifice the next day. All the details of the incident were noted by the scribes, but they were also distorted in the legends and tales passed on through the centuries. Nevertheless, the immediate consequence was that everything changed. The rich, who had previously had a hand in the exploitation of the people, now, in view of what had happened to the evil priests and the holy city, were fearful of meeting a similar fate. They were considerably humbled and assisted the new leaders in instigating the changes required. Gradually, the people became contented again, as they had been in times prior to the secession. Inclined towards pastoral rather than industrial or urban pursuits, they spread throughout Africa during the course of the centuries that followed and numbered, eventually, several million. Nevertheless, towns were only established in the area where the Red Sea is now, and along the banks of a large river that flowed through the center of Africa. The people managed to develop their psychic abilities enormously. Many were able to travel short distances by means of levitation, and telepathy resumed its significance in their lives, becoming commonplace. There were also frequent instances of physical ailments being cured by the laying on of hands. Amicable relations were re-established with the black people in Australia and New Guinea, who came to visit them regularly on chariots of fire, as they sometimes called the spaceships still being used by their Australian brothers.